This is a very exciting panel that we're about to start, really checking into the legislative session. And the fact of the matter is we have two of the most powerful women in state government here with us today. And I'm very proud and honored to moderate this session. First, I'd like to just provide a brief introduction, and we'll go into the heart of the matter of not only what happened in the legislative session, what are some of the real priorities, legislative priorities in the energy sector. But first, I'd like to introduce Senator Lynn DeCoite. We all know as Senator for Senate District 7, and had previously served 4 years as in the House of Representatives representing District 13. You can tell how she's felt in the Senate by the appointments she's been given, that she's earned. The chair of the Committee on Energy, Economic Development, and Tourism, serves on the Agriculture, Environment, and Ways and Means committees. She was born in Honolulu, but at a very young age moved to Molokai when she was 4. Third generation homestead farmer, and she and her husband are the owners of L&R Farms Enterprises, where she raises the famous Molokai purple sweet potatoes. In addition to being a small business owner, she's been very involved in the community with the annual Molokai Christmas Parade, Molokai Ag Festival, and the annual Prince Kuhio Day event, and the Molokai Annual Charity Walk, and has done a number of other really important things in the community. The parent-teacher organization president for Molokai Middle School, for example. So I'm very pleased to welcome her today. We welcome Senator DeCoite.
Thank you.
And make a brief introduction to Representative Nicole Lowen, and then we'll get into our program. Let's see. Representative Lowen serves House District 7. Is in her 6th term, right? And extremely geographically large district, from Kailua Kona all the way to Spencer Beach Park. She was first elected in 2012, and again, another extremely important position, being chair of the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection and co-chair of the House Special Committee on Red Hill, and is a member of the Committee of Agriculture and the Committee on Consumer Protection and Commerce. She's also a third-year appointee by the Secretary of Energy to the U.S. Department of Energy's Electricity Advisory Committee, and is serving as the co-chair of the Council of State Government Western Region Committee on Energy and the Environment. So she's also been heavily involved in education, earlier part of her life, this early part of your vocation, and again, very, very pleased to have her on this panel, Representative Lowen. So this is really going to be kind of a talk story about the recent activity in the Hawaii Legislature and where we may or should be headed. To set the stage, I want to take a few steps back and talk about maybe what you see as your key objectives, and the host of policy objectives from economic development to energy resilience, climate change, and energy security. You know, which among these do you see as kind of key among that? And I'd like you to also think about our strategic location in the Middle Pacific, being the most remote, populous place on Earth, about how that affects our energy future and what essentially, you know, how did the legislature this year sort of deal with issues that really respond to us here in the middle of the Pacific. So with that, I'd like to start with Senator DeCoite.
So is that a question mark? No, no. No, that's plain. So aloha everybody, and thank you for having us here. I can tell you that legislature was a circus this year. You know, we talk a lot and we lack execution on a lot of our stuff, and I know working with my counterpart on the other side, Representative Lowen, who has literally spearheaded a lot of our energy, environment issues. For me, as a first-time chair for energy, economic development, and tourism, I've learned a lot from her. I learned a lot from coming to conferences such as these and talking with individuals within business. You know, for myself, we've always had our challenges as living smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's been about imports of just about everything you can imagine. We talk a lot about sustainability, where we see ourselves in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I think as we heard our inspirational speaker speak earlier, Daphne, you know, we should all give her a round of applause. I think, you know, she was spot on. Sometimes we just forget the basics of who we are and where we come from, and it literally starts from there. Being a business owner, being able to farm, and trying to make sure we sustain ourselves is the same situation we face with energy. But at the end of the day, it's really about educating us. So having these conferences, having the sit-down meets and talk story is about educating us so that we can drive legislation to truly execute sustainability and renewable energy. On my front, I like the fact of diversification. As we pray for those in Guam, and we see that as their energy, whether the repercussions of what happens in the aftermath is making sure we can sustain ourselves, we have the resources to be up and running when it comes to solar, when damages occur, because if most of us have said is the chain supply and making sure the needed parts, supplies are there to put things back up and running. We can't always rely on the imports outside of Hawaii. So I can truly appreciate the many hours, the many months that we've spent literally working on legislation, but at the end of the day, we rely on you guys to also support that legislation that we've worked on to make sure the priority, for me, it's always been water, food, shelter, and energy that has encompassed all of this. So, you know, it's been an honor. And then also having our new Office of Energy chair has given me a lot of support and advice. But at the end of the day, we need to really put our money where our mouth is and have the commitment on behalf of the state and government to ensure reliability and sustainability. So thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Great. Thanks so much, Senator DeCoite. I guess, you know, from your perspective, Representative Lowen, you know, again, what are the things that drive you? You know, when I think about your district in particular, from, you know, as I mentioned, from Kona all the way to Spencer Park and then Pu'avava and all that. I mean, obviously there's so many things, includes not just the electricity sector, but the transportation sector. What's really driving you?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you, and thanks for hosting us here in Maui, and Senator DeCoite for having us to your home county. It's been a pleasure working with Senator DeCoite, who's now chairing the energy subject matter in the Senate. Mark, to your question, I think it's kind of all of the above. I mean, you mentioned resilience, affordability, there's transportation, reliability, all of these things matter. Hawaii, of course, and this isn't news to anyone here, I mean, we're sort of particularly concerned with the idea of energy independence and not being overly reliant on imports. That can put us in a bad situation. And of course, costs being the most expensive state for energy in the nation. So, but kind of on a more micro level, and maybe this is an opportunity to talk about, even though as Senator said, it was a bit of a circus this year at the legislature, we did pass some good measures, maybe in the context of what we've been working on, we can talk about some of those. I would say the focus of, I do think the legislature has an important role to play in policy, setting a policy direction. And we do get a lot of flack, depending on who you're talking to for, the 100% renewable, especially when that was happening. But without that, I don't think we would be where we are today. And you can kind of see the impact, a good example of the impact that policy and the laws that we passed have would be, last year we passed a bill to fix the RPS formula so that it was calculated on the percent of generation not sales, so that it would count behind the meter generation or not double count it. And you could see the impact of that really clearly this year in how those numbers jumped in the most recent report. So I think these things that we're doing, they do have real world impact. Of course, Legislature is not the only player, and we're not even the biggest player in this game, so it's not everything requires legislation to be addressed. That said, I think at least in recent years, I've been chair of the committee in the House this is my 5th year, and we've really, I think, spent a lot of time focusing on what are the next steps to get towards that 100% goal. That was the big, flashy, exciting bill that we passed when I was newer. But now we're kind of drilling down into what else do we need to get there? How can we encourage more energy efficiency? How can we help facilitate a just transition and think about equity? And the same for the transportation transition. How can we facilitate that in a way that's cost effective and fair and equitable? That said, I would guess I can highlight a couple of the things, even though it was a bit of a mess this year. We did pass a few good measures. 2 of them relating to energy efficiency. One was House Bill 192, and this is a clean lighting initiative that phases out, starting in 2025, the sale of fluorescent bulbs that contain mercury. I think this results in something like an average annual savings of $37 million to ratepayer bills. And it'll start phasing out the importation of those bulbs which contain mercury, which is a hazardous waste. I think something like more than 75% of these bulbs are not ever properly disposed of, so all that mercury ends up in the environment. And then on top of that, these are use half as much energy, so they're twice as efficient and last 2 or 3 times longer. So life cycle cost is much lower to switch to LEDs. But people still buy what they're used to buying, and so I think the legislature's role in sort of driving that forward faster than it would happen if we just left it to the market is important. Another measure I want to talk about is a Senate Bill 691, and that added to our state's appliance efficiency standards, so that will increase energy and water efficiency in certain appliances. And I think the big, more interesting part of that is that we gave the Energy Office the power to add to that list via rulemaking instead of having to go to the legislature every year. And then I thought I would also add in the state budget this year, there was $100 million included for the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Authority. So this is like the what we sometimes call the GEMS program. So this will help finance rooftop solar plus storage systems, but it's geared towards low and moderate income families, so ALICE families. So I think that will really help bring, again, more equity to this renewable energy transition. And then the nice thing about that funding to HGIA is that they'll have more autonomy over designing their programs, because this will be separate from the bond funding that they sort of have to go through the PUC process to make any changes they ever want to make with that program. They have to, it's much more cumbersome. And looks like Mark is impatient to get the mic back.
No, those are significant, and Senate Bill 691 in particular is kind of daunting because, like you said, the chief energy officer is given this responsibility for not only enforcement but identifying what other appliances or devices should be included in the future. It's like, that's a huge responsibility, to actually think that, our office could now do the analysis based on the effectiveness of these other, efforts. And we're looking at things that will actually have a big impact. HGIA, the $100 million, which is really, I think, focused on low and moderate income, such a big deal. Beyond that, we can go back to some of your other priorities, but I wanted to ask, particularly with tourism and destination management and some huge changes there at the legislature, all of that impacts energy. I mean, what are your thoughts on some of the next steps we take there, and where do we get lessons for how to do this better?
That has been a subject matter that has started from day one when we opened session. Tourism has been our number one engine driver. Destination management, it's kind of like what the panel prior to us talked about, is you need to go back into the communities. What do they want to see happen in their communities? All too often as government, we've driven laws, policy top down, and that needs to stop. We need to take the basic needs first, and then build it as it goes forward. We've seen as we went through COVID, you talk about businesses shutting down, the diversification going forward, how we set up that portfolio for the state of Hawaii is really key. In fact, I just got back from New Zealand and Rarotonga, and what they have going on there, of course, they have solar, talk of hydrogen coming online on different places. We've had that talk this morning. I was speaking with a woman earlier at breakfast, and it's truly, you got to diversify it, because as tourism comes in, the depletion or limited resources that we already have, it needs to be factored in, because you truly have to take care of the community first. And as you build it, figure out what is maximum capacity. Rarotonga, same thing like Hawaii, they have limited resources, water, infrastructure. And as we let the first inaugural flight go into Rarotonga, and they're hungry for tourism, at the same time, limited water resources, the thought that people coming in, I think the plus on their side was that you need to be born and raised in order to buy land, in order to invest. Again, on their forefront of solar in the Cook Island, it's all government owned. There's been a lot of exchange. Again, they are gonna open their doors. At some point, I'd like to take a look at them again in a few months where they're at, because we've opened our doors, and to some extent, living in Maui County, my district entails the islands of Molokai, Lanai, and all of upcountry and East Maui, and we were just inundated with tourism, which is why destination management was crucial, and how we see people going into East Maui, water resources that have been redirected, and tourism played a huge impact. At the same time, making sure our budget is still there to meet the needs, the resources that we need to continue to provide. And when all is said and done, is the education process of where we are, where the state is at, how we plan to fund and financially support it, which is why this is really critical that the public-private partnership is fully engaged with its community, so that way we can set the stage moving forward. So thank you for the question, Mark.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's so many opportunities there, and of course that's so wonderful that you're able to reach out and actually touch base and have that kind of relationship with other Pacific communities. I think back to something that you had mentioned, Representative Lowen, about being deeply concerned about all of the essentially the litany of policy objectives in the energy field. But I know that there's a lot of attention to probably the most difficult part of the transition. That's in transportation, which counts for more than 50% of our energy mix, and the ground transportation. We know that air travel's been actually increasing, so it's actually more than half of that, but ground transportation still is massive piece of the energy mix. So kind of where, in terms of EVs, I think playing a kind of a leading role from everyone's perspective, and where the automakers are going and so on. What did we do enough this session? I think there was it was pretty mixed at best, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, I can talk about what we did do, and then maybe some of the bills that died that we should come back to next year. We did pass a couple of Senate bills. One was to establish like a VMT or vehicle miles traveled based road usage charge. And this will, I guess, maybe remove that complaint we've heard people make in the past that EVs aren't paying their fair share, that as cars become more efficient, the revenues from the fuel tax are declining, and these are the funds that go to help us improve roads and keep those.
I think that was Senate Bill 1534, maybe?
1534,
Yeah.
yes, Senate Bill 1534. So that was one thing. We passed Senate Bill 1024, I believe, and this created 2 working groups, one to look at ground transportation and one at inter-island travel. So this is, tackling that air travel question. And then in the budget, we got in place finally after a couple years of trying a expenditure ceiling increase for the Public Utilities Commission. What basically this means is that there is an electric vehicle charging system rebate program that we established in 2019 where, to help incentivize deployment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But we've had to come back and allocate money to it every year from the legislature, so it's always sort of up in the air whether it's going to have sustainable funding. But with that ceiling increase, the funding will be set and will be there. Some of the bills that failed that I definitely think we need to come back to, maybe I'll start with some of the more aspirational ones first. I mean, one was just a rebate for purchase of EVs that I think was also geared towards low and moderate income individuals, because we know the upfront cost is still a little bit higher. We want this transition to be equitable, and even though there are some pretty generous federal tax credits, those only apply to certain models. It's a little bit more limited. And so that was one thing that kind of died early on. We had another bill that would look at creating some kind of incentive program for private fleet transition. We have a bill that we passed some years ago to mandate state fleet transition of fleet vehicles to zero emission vehicles. But private fleets, I think, are interested in making this transition, but there is an additional upfront cost for it, so nobody really wants to jump first because then they feel like they're at a disadvantage. So there might be a role for the state to play in trying to help facilitate that. And then one other bill that made it all the way to the 11th hour and then died, and I was pretty frustrated with that because this just seemed like a really common sense, obvious, like everybody supported it, and this was just a bill for state facilities to, establish a goal for state facilities to be EV ready, to mandate that new construction included EV ready new construction for state facilities. So again, we're just focusing on the state leading by example what we'd like to see in private sector. And that's not to say they would all have to have chargers included at construction, just the wiring in place to accommodate that. And then, it also included a part that would have assessed, where we might want to start with retrofitting existing facilities to add some EV chargers first. The argument being that we really need workplace charging to be able to shift some of that load to the middle of the day during the peak hours. And that workplace charging just provides an option to people who might not be able to charge at home for whatever reason. And so that to me was like broadly supported, completely made sense, not a scary measure at all, still didn't make it out of conference. So that's like an example of one thing we'll come back to next year.
Yeah, and I'd like to just sort of interject a question from the audience about one of the bills that you said that had passed. I think there was a lot of support for. The question is, rather than give $100 million to GEMS, why not give every Hawaii resident $100 to spend on energy improvements? And you kind of talked about another bill that actually had some basically rebates for the community, but how do you respond to that?
I mean, that's like a policy, like fiscal policy call, I think. I mean, the bill that I'm talking, I mean, I see what you're saying. I said the word rebate, but it's a little bit different because it's rebates, like really not for the current EV charging system rebate is not for individual homeowners to put a charging system in their garage, which is not like super expensive. It's more for like deploying public charging infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of energy efficiency incentives in the federal legislation that came down. I think we do, we have the public benefits fee and organizations like Hawaii Energy that works to help encourage ratepayers to invest in energy efficiency. But I don't know, I guess I would question whether just broadly doing, or like someone's asking the question, instead of allocating that money to a certain place, why not just send everyone a rebate check for $100? I mean, you can't know exactly what you wouldn't achieve the same kind of policy outcome. But I would say also the $100 million for GEMS is capital funding, so it's going to be put out there in low interest loans, et cetera, and it's going to capitalize that program for a long time to come. So it's not kind of like a one-shot deal. It's going to keep being able to finance on an ongoing basis for quite a long time.
Yes, Senator DeCoite.
Kind of along the lines, when we went through COVID, we gave out rebates, and, GEMS directly goes towards, energy stuff. And, you pass out these rebates and you realize that, you have to have structure. You have to figure out, are they going to use the $100 to then gear it towards that? I mean, we've seen just a lot of money being floated around. At the end of the day, when we start talking about energy, GEMS has done a really good job, as we looked into it. And, we have to build infrastructure. We have to have options out there. I'm not too much on giving somebody $100. I mean, $100 won't go so far. And it needs to have direction as to where it's going, because it becomes a free-for-all if how do you validate that, and then you try to say, okay, by the way, what did you do with your $100 actually? Did you just blow it on, I don't know, a Molokai, I guess 2 cases of beer, or, we want to encourage the renewables and literally, kind of put our money where our mouth is. Just.
Really good points. Really good points. So I think, and I remember, similar discussion with the Native Hawaiian Revolving Loan Fund, and it was about when you made it a real loan and you had to pay it back, it created, a certain level of self-sufficiency, and then it was revolving, so you could actually use it again. Rebates are a one-time thing, right? So we have another interesting question. This one comes from Aloha McGuffey. How do we get all landowners of a big box hotel ground lessors help in nature-based environmental conservation and energy management planning throughout the state of Hawaii? The management company's executives are not usually here long enough to understand and make meaningful long-term contributions. But it's landowners of big box hotel ground lessors help in nature-based environmental conservation is the question. And I guess it's sort of like what can the legislature do about that? I don't know, is there a role there? Or?
What was the question? Was it about, did you say, was that hotels, or who?
It's about
landowners.
Yeah.
I mean, they could invest in sustainability measures and energy efficiency and EV charging and, other kinds of things on their own, within all their own facilities, for one thing. I can think of a lot of others. I'll let Lynn take a shot at it too.
So thanks, Nicole. A lot of it is really trying to bring them to the table. All too often, we don't have the owner or the investors or shareholders actually at the table. They send the messenger. Trying to educate them. I think our challenge has been literally, you have a lot of these hotels that are here, they take the money and they run and they don't invest it back. I mean, to some point, whether we would have to look at unconstitutionality and targeting that sector to say, okay, you must invest back X amount or percentage of your revenues back into renewables, that could be looked at. But again, it only becomes unconstitutional, I guess, when it's challenged at that point. But the reality of it is that if they truly are vested in our state and they're planning to walk out of here, then they should put some skin in the game and say, I'm committed to Hawaii, I'm committed to where we're going in climate change, sea level rise, and environmental issues. Sitting down and having conversation with them, what I do hear from a lot of them has been, oh, by the way, we're running out of sand. Crime has increased. I said, well, let me reflect back when Molokai filled up a lot of that sand in Waikiki. Where the hell were you thinking about sea level rise back then, yet you still plan to fill your pockets and take your money and run? So, those conversations need to be had. And I can tell you, being able to work closely with Rep. Lowen, she has always stayed on that point. In the beginning, I'd be like, oh, Nicole, you're just irritating me. But, I mean, but, she made a point. As we start to have more conversation with a lot of the different companies, they're truly those that have invested back into Hawaii. And then you get a few rotten apples. It's those the ones that we need to have the conversation with, and then either legislate, which I hate to legislate. I'd rather sit down like we do and figure out what kind of options are out there. What is your commitment to Hawaii? Is it only going to be about making money and running and not looking at the next generation? So it's really good when I find out that they've actually set up grassroots here and Hawaii doesn't become a second home where they bring their friends and they run out. But, at the end of the day, they need to literally commit to Hawaii if they really want to do business here. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Did you?
Well, just quickly, I think, at the legislature, we have sort of a limited, there's a sort of a lot of limitations around how much we can regulate private industry. An electric utility is a little bit different because it's a regulated monopoly. But I think that ultimately the power that the state and county do have is taxation, right? And then deciding how those tax dollars get spent and whether you want to look at, differentiating tax rates for hotels or tourism. That power exists. It just hasn't always been exercised as, it can be implemented in all kinds of different ways, and I'm sure that could be very controversial. So, but we think people should be giving back to preserving the environment. That's what brings people here in the first place and sustains their industry. So, that was kind of the green fee discussion we had at the legislature this year. Which my committee wasn't referred to, but Senator DeCoite's is kind of an example of trying to go that direction, but then we're, putting it on individuals coming in because I don't think you can't legally do that to a hotel specifically.
Right. So this next question is really kind of interesting, and I think you're both going to like it. But it actually was something I was thinking about asking in a different way as well. So I'm going to ask the question from Camille Cleveland, and then sort of elaborate a little bit. We talked a lot about community engagement and bottom-up policy making. That was in the last session. But a lot of folks are still overwhelmed and intimidated by the legislature. Wonder why. What does it look like in practice to engage a broader set of residents in the legislative session, meeting them where they're at and allowing them to weigh in on bill drafting, i.e. opportunities beyond just testifying? In a sense, as a kind of a follow-up to that, a lot of these bills were pretty well done, and they actually had support, but I don't think a lot of the senior legislative team, had enough time to distill that. So how do you actually do that? How do we all work together in advance with the communities and with people that want to know, they want to get a broader set of residents in the legislative session, and also communicate that to the leadership in the legislature?
Go ahead.
So I'll just start. What we've done is that we've actually got public access to come out into the communities. Public access room is a way that will give you a snapshot as to how legislation occurs, how to get the contacts of who your representative and your senator is, how to engage them. It's basically on 1 hour crash course into legislature. Basically, if it's energy, who's your energy chairs, who's the committee. So whatever subject matter it is, it allows you that opportunity to have a conversation. With all that being said, at the end of the day, as we start to have a lot of these good bills, let's not forget we had so many new representatives. I think we had 18 brand new representatives that came in, all of them trying to figure out how legislature works, came in, basically that I don't like this, I don't like that. Well, how does a shoe look on the other side of the foot now while you're trying to legislate? Because now in the House you're working with there's 51 of you, and the Senate there's 25 of you. So what I tell people to do as you folks congregate and meet for these conferences, figure out what happened last session, where the bill got stopped, and then go get the people that stopped that area, the constituents from there, to go talk to them. And give them a snapshot or a bullet point of the issues, the pros and cons, and literally just be upfront. For whatever reason those individuals might have, I mean, I don't agree with a lot of my colleagues on what they do. Same with Nicole, she doesn't agree with a lot of what they do. But by you guys also playing a role in there to help us move some of where, for whatever reason, the legislation has been held or conferences come up and conferees have not been put on there, if that's the individual senator or rep that has held it, you need to educate them. You need to let them know and email them and call the office and say, by the way, I'm a constituent. I'm very concerned as to why this bill is not being heard, why you have not set conferees up. And I tell you, you will gain a lot of traction because it ain't always about the mighty dollar. And it ain't always about the big companies saying, oh, we don't like you hear this bill because of whatever. Give me a reason why this bill is important, why it's not important, what is the impacts, how it will affect them. You know, if at that point that individual rep or senator is not going to listen to it, you got to continue to pound on their door. And I just gonna say this, squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you need to be in there constantly. I mean, not disrespecting or cussing at them, because some of us will cuss back, literally. But, you know, just, you know, give them the option to say, this is where we're at. Technology, as we talked about, has worked out very well. Because for many of us that have dealt with delays and cancellations of flights and having to wait in our halls for hours upon hours to then find out that that bill you wanted to got deferred, I mean, can literally blow a fuse on anybody. I mean, I get upset if I'm flying after paying $250 to testify. So utilize the Zoom function, utilize our public access room, and then, you know, have the opportunity to sit down with the rep and the senator in your area, because they'll also be able to help direct you. And I think just that basic part has been able to help me push a lot of legislation. And then at the same time, for myself and Rep Lowen, you know, we always, you know, we'll have the conversation running in between meetings. It's like, hey, you got some time, I gotta talk to you. There's this bill coming up. And then we also drive in companion bills. And we talk to our committees and so forth. So that's a key point, and I'll just let, you know, Rep Lowen elaborate more on it. You know, and that's what I would recommend.
No, that was, I think, a really good answer. I would just add, I guess, whoever asked the question, I imagine that they have something specific in mind. That's kind of usually the case. And sometimes with community, I mean, I like to always remind people, like, focus on problem solving and, you know, not get attached to a specific bill number or, you know, a specific, you know, process or something. I think that, I mean, like I said, every situation is really different, so I'm curious, whoever asked that question, come find me after. Maybe I can provide a better answer. But I think, you know, sometimes advocates get a little bit stuck in, like, we just want this one thing, and it's like this or nothing. Or, you know, we worked and we drafted this bill, and it's like, well, we have professional drafting agencies at the legislature, you know, that might have a little more expertise in how something needs to look. So, I mean, I think it's just important to remember that, and remember that we're here to work together and solve problems. And it's not necessarily about a specific bill number or a specific like piece of legislation, that sometimes people get a little attached to that.
Okay. So I'm going to paraphrase one of the questions that came in. How do you feel about having a session every year? I mean, do you feel like the structure for that, somebody was suggesting perhaps you do 1 year for research and analysis, and then you do second year for the actual legislation. I'd never actually heard that as an option, but what are your first impression thoughts of that? So, I mean, it's an option, but I can tell you when we have session from January to first week in May, after we end session, our job at that point is to do the research. And we research actually throughout the whole year.
we share ideas because as a vast amount of land that Rep. Lowen has to cover, I'm separated by islands. And we research during interim, we talk a lot, we get into our communities. The internet has done wonders for us by email. As a lot of information keeps coming in, we then, we either have people on the ground that we can, reach out to. But if you research for a whole year, and then you want to look at legislation the following year, you could miss the window of opportunity in a year that you could have actually had the opportunity to legislate and help to move our initiatives forward. I kind of like where it is, but I'm always open to options. I just think it's going to be more challenging for us to try and legislate. And in this case, if the Office of Energy needs more positions like public utilities, you're going to have to wait a whole year while he's going to struggle to initiate whatever laws that we've passed this year and to address it. But again, I'm always open to options. What's your thoughts?
I think there's any kind of system has pros and cons. So what we do is probably pretty standard compared to other states, like a shorter session every year. Some states do only every other year. That's typically red states, I think. And some states have year-round legislatures, like we have year-round county. And I think any system probably has its pros and cons. So there's never going to be one ideal thing. There's not one right answer. I think if there's a particular problem that you feel like you see with the system we have now, then maybe saying what that problem is would be a good starting point for a discussion, what the problem is that you see, instead of just saying, here's the solution. There's never a one-size-fits-all, I don't think.
Definitely good points from both of you on that. Very difficult to change.
Yeah,
anyway.
Plus you would be really giving that much more power. You would just be taking away that checks and balances system for an entire year, and you'd be giving that much more power to the governor and executive branch agencies.
Right. In our short bit of time left, maybe a minute and a half for each of you, what are some must-haves for the next session, and what should we be doing? Is there something you would like the Energy Office or other agencies to really focus on and bring to you and to make happen? It needs to really happen. Start with you, Senator.
So for me, we worked on solar rooftops, and I really want to make sure that the average person can afford to have that. We have so many laws in place, permitting issues. I think it was Senate Bill 781. We worked through it all the way, and we had our challenges. And literally, what we were trying to get away from was stalling that project for rooftops. Nicole and I went back and forth. What can we do? We sat down with, the solar. We sat down with unions, and we said, how do we make this happen? At the end of the day, we actually had to turn it into a working group to bring all the players on the table. And I really hate every time we talk about, let's do a study. It's that's the most irritating thing for me. Let's do a study, and I'd rather see the funds go to what we already have and then upskill the issues that we had challenges with. But solar rooftops, and I got mine 20-something years ago. So I was talking with somebody last night, and he was doing cleaning. I was like, I guess I'm obsolete, and I had net metering. But when my bill came down to $8, I was like, holy smokes, I'm paying $400. I'm hardly ever home. But I went down to $8, and then I get to roll at the end of the year. But it's really critical. I mean, we got so much sun here, but I'm hoping that we come back with palatable legislation that we can help the average person. And I know we always talk about low income. I just flustered with how we cannot help middle income. And the middle income is falling to the low income because we don't have these things in place to help them. So I want us that's my one priority is to see the solar rooftop be faster moving, just bang, 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 versus we having the permitting process be the issue. But at the same time, having the safety mechanism in case something does happen.
Okay, Rocky Mold and our team, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get to work. Last word.
Yeah, I think any of the bills that that didn't pass this session, a lot of them will probably be bringing back. For me, that includes what Lynn just talked about, Senator DeCoite, and then also some of the electric vehicle bills. And then I would say too, I mean, I really want to dive in, and this is again, we're assigning homework to you, Mark. A couple years ago we passed the energy efficiency for state facilities bill that I don't think a lot of action has been taken yet to implement, and we're coming up against deadlines by which technically it will be legally required in law to have moved forward on looking into how to save energy in state facilities. Another thing, kind of one last thing to mention, we did pass a resolution just on the House side to urge the state agency to look into the direct pay option in the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is because state agencies and nonprofits can't claim the tax credit because they're tax exempt, the federal government is basically offering just direct payments. So if state facilities like schools, other state buildings, airports, things like that want to install solar systems, solar plus battery systems, they can get paid back 30% of that from the federal government. But we'll have to have some push from our side to make that happen, and some investment of funding too. But I think that would be a really sad opportunity to miss. So I want to spend some time thinking about that.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, we all have our work cut out for us, I guess. I think that wraps up this session. We're out of time, but I'd love for you to give some great gratitude to these two extraordinary public policy makers, Representative Lowen and Senator DeCoite.